say India is negative scores or middle score or positive score on each one.
Yes.
The first one is about people matters, the depopulation bomb.
Which is hitting the world, and India scores relatively well on this front.
India, positive score
yes.
on that, where our population is growing well. The circle of life, where crisis leads to reform, leads to revival, complacency, back to crisis. Doesn't that typify India?
Well, I think like India is somewhere like in the middle there, because the government is still carrying out some incremental reforms.
Even though we're not in a crisis.
Exactly, but we are now outside the 2-year window, which is the sweet spot. I mean, for getting gains, but at a time when populism is on the rise in many countries in the world, at least some incremental reform is going on here, whether FDI liberalization or something. Right. But I am a bit disappointed that in the first 2 years, there's so much more that this government could have done, given the political capital it had, particularly in the first year. But still, I'd say a neutral score there.
Neutral score, in the middle score.
Exactly.
Billionaires, good versus bad, and the inequality. Now, India has got quite a lot of inequality, has got quite a lot of bad billionaires, but
it's
good
changing for the better.
Are changing for the better. So where would you place
that? So somewhere like in the middle as well, because I mean, on many of those three vectors that we looked at, India has far too many inherited billionaires. India's share of billionaires is also relatively high, but it's changing for the better in that the number of good billionaires that have shot up this decade is very encouraging, and crony capitalism is on decline.
Perils of the state. You know, your thing about the public sector being too out of balance.
Right.
How does India face in that?
Well, a definite negative.
Definite negative, yes.
That the government here is far too meddlesome, the public sector is much too bloated, and the government is just not doing enough to free its hands of these public sector companies. So I'd say a clear negative here.
Your fifth point that we went through were the development of new cities, and not just, push people into the old big, 15 million people strong. There are only 2 in India, and those are also, you say 0 in India, and 9 versus 19 in China. So where would you put negative
as well?
Middle?
No, I'd say negative as well, because, we just have, I think about 17% of India's urban population is stuck in just 5 mega cities. Whereas if you look at China, that number is 10% across 6 mega cities. So much greater spatial distribution there compared to what's happening in India.
Very interesting. Governments can do that by various incentives, I guess. But they need to recognize it first.
Yes.
Your 6th rule, factories first, that manufacturing is important. Negative, middle, positive for India.
Well, I'd say somewhere like in the middle, because our overall investment as a share of GDP is in the sweet spot. But looking beyond that, the pickup in manufacturing and private investment is disappointing. So overall investment is relatively okay, but it's not something which we want to see, because we want to see much more in terms of the private sector and the manufacturing doing better.
Right. The price of onions, basic inflation, where you said looking historically across countries, the countries that have done well, high growth has been accompanied by low inflation. Where would India on the inflation front be?
Well, I'd say positive now, because that was like a big problem with the Indian economy over the last 6 to 7 years. And that's something which I think has been rectified. And I just hope this new government or the new governor continues with that commitment in terms of some sort of an inflation target.
So you're saying Raghuram Rajan's focus on controlling inflation was a very good thing?
Yes.
It was.
Absolutely, yes.
And we need more of that.
Yes.
You're not the only, I mean, there are many who don't. But
yes, but,
but I think the consensus
I think they argue with the means in terms
yes.
of, should interest rates have been used or other measures. But I think most people will agree that low inflation helps the poor, it helps the economy in general.
That's quite a change in thinking from 20 years ago.
Right.
Cheap is good. That a country that looks to be reasonably priced, people are attracted, foreign investments attracted, trade is attracted. Where would
I think
India?
India's, feels relatively inexpensive today. So like cheap is good. I think India feels relatively inexpensive compared to many other countries. Now, I know that some people argue that it could even be cheaper and that'll help our exports further. But in general, I would rank India good on this
Good
rule.
on that. Now, the kiss of debt, with China is obviously in a really ugly state on that. India, we've got, have we got a reverse problem, or where would you put India?
Well, I'd still say like India there is like on the good side. At a time when debt levels across the world have gone up so sharply in the last 7 to 8 years, and it's one of the big mega trends which is affecting the global economy today. The fact that in India, the debt levels really haven't gone gone up much on an overall basis. Even the government's debt, which is high in India as a share of GDP, has stabilized in the last few years. So on that rule, I'd be willing to rank India as good.
As good.
Yeah.
So that's a positive. So actually, we've ended up with 4 positives, 3 negatives, and 3 middling.
Yeah, because the last one on the hype, as I said, India is clearly a negative.
Yeah, exactly. The hype is, right, you don't have to say that, it's
But overall,
overhyped.
therefore I said that I think that India looks relatively good because of the fact that if you look at these rules, there is no nation in the world which is going to rank on all 10 in terms of either good or bad. Right. It's a question of the average score, and the fact that India sort of, has the average tilting towards good is something which is good. But there's one thing, though, I say about India, which is that this is a country that has consistently disappointed the optimists and the pessimists.
That's lovely.
That's the history of India, right? Because every time you think this is going to be the next China, it disappoints you. On the other hand, there is every time there's a sense of crisis, like in 2013, that the rupee is falling out of bed, something really negative is going on, or there are riots breaking out somewhere. There's enough resilience in this economy to keep things going.
India disappoints the optimists and the pessimists.
Yes, has consistently done that. And so that's what I think we should sort of keep India in perspective. That's what I tell, when people sort of have views about India. There are other countries can have very strong views on. On China, I feel very negatively currently. Other countries, I feel very strongly
Basically,
positively.
India will disappoint you. Sometimes for the better.
Yes, sometimes for the better.